Mike Pence gets tough with China, immigrants are mad everywhere, and trying to save some priceless artifacts in Afghanistan. All that and more is coming up on the Hot Zone.
This is the Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
Hey folks, I'm Chuck Holton. Thanks for being with us on the Hot Zone today. China is not going to get a U.S. trade deal unless it honors its 1984 commitments to Hong Kong, said the U.S. Vice President Mike Pence on Monday. Speaking in Detroit, the U.S. president urged demonstrators in Hong Kong and the Chinese authorities to resolve their differences peacefully, but he said the U.S. didn't want Chinese markets to suffer and underlined the ongoing productive discussions on trade between the U.S. and China, but he cautioned it would be much harder for us to make a deal if something violent happens in Hong Kong. Pence said that over the past 17 years, China has become a less free society. He's certainly right about that. He's accused the Chinese Communist Party of engaging in all kinds of practices that are inconsistent with free and fair trade. And he added that any deal would have to be on U.S. terms because China has had it so good for so long. Ain't that the truth?
We hope to see an expansion of the entire family of human rights in China. But over the past 17 years, we haven't seen it. In fact, the Chinese Communist Party has used an arsenal of policies inconsistent with free and fair trade, policies like tariffs and quotas, currency manipulation, forced technology transfer, intellectual property theft, and industrial subsidies, all the while not becoming a freer society, but actually in so many ways moving China in the opposite direction. We don't want China's markets to suffer. In fact, we want them to thrive. President Trump has a positive relationship with President Xi, and we have great respect for the Chinese people. We're in the midst of productive discussions with China, and they'll continue in the weeks ahead. But for the United States to make a deal with China, Beijing needs to honor its commitments, beginning with the commitment China made in 1984 to respect the integrity of Hong Kong's laws through the Sino-British Joint Declaration. As the President said yesterday, it'll be much harder for us to make a deal if something violent happens in Hong Kong. And I want to assure you, our administration will continue to urge Beijing to act in a humanitarian manner and urge China and the demonstrators in Hong Kong to resolve their differences peaceably. President Trump believes China wants to make a deal. But as the President has made clear, it's got to be a deal on our terms, because China has had it so good for so long that things have to change. As the President has said, the days of stealing American jobs, American companies, and America's ideas are over. And so they are. The time has come for China to come to the table, open their markets, and live by the rules of international commerce, like every other industrialized nation does.
Earlier this month, U.S. President Donald Trump announced plans to extend tariffs across virtually all Chinese imports, many of them consumer products, that were exempt from early rounds of tariffs. The tariffs have been delayed, but ultimately are going to raise the costs for U.S. companies bringing goods in from China. Moving on to the Mediterranean, the humanitarian group Open Arms says that 9 migrants have jumped into the sea because they're desperately trying to reach the coast of Lampedusa. That's an Italian island that's just a few hundred meters away from where the ship is anchored. Open Arms said Tuesday that both the Italian Coast Guard and its own crew are trying to rescue the swimmers, adding that the situation was really getting out of control. The video shows people wearing orange life vests and floating in the sea, and a lot of those people really cannot swim. They don't come from places with a lot of water. So dozens of refugees from various countries have been protesting for their rights outside the UNHCR office in Jakarta, Indonesia, and they want help getting to destination countries. These are refugees from countries like Afghanistan and Iraq and Iran, Sudan, and others. And they've been stuck in Indonesia for years, and they say the UN agency isn't processing their resettlement claims fast enough.
Australia, Canada, America, New Zealand, doesn't matter for us. Just go. Just let us go to next country. We are building our life. Please push UN to helping us. Please helping us. We are single. We are a standby. We don't have any future life. They are not give us any hope. Please helping us. That's it, helping. We want to go to next country. We want to work. We want to have a building our family. We want to have a good life.
Some refugees say they don't even care what country they go to as long as they can find a new place to work and build a good life for their families. Thousands of refugees are scattered throughout Indonesia, stranded with some hope of making it to maybe Australia or the U.S. As you've seen on this show before, I've talked a lot about the refugees from Indonesia that are coming across to the United States via the pipeline that comes up from Ecuador all the way through Mexico. Let's move on to Poland now. Dozens of rescuers are working around the clock to try to find two spelunkers who are trapped by rising water in a cave in southern Poland. Probably didn't hear about that on the news. These two guys became trapped on Saturday while they were exploring some uncharted parts of the Wilkaszniza cave in the Tatra Mountains. The rescue chief, whose name is Jan Krzysztof, he said on Monday that there had been no contact with the missing cavers. They did find some of their equipment, though. Now, this guy's team could only roughly guess where they could be inside Poland's deepest and longest cave. There are lots of places in there nobody's ever been. The rescuers are progressing really slowly, using small amounts of explosives, believe it or not, to crumble the rocks and widen the passages. Up to 3-hour breaks are needed between the explosions to ventilate the air out of the cave, so it's taken a long time. But they say the team knows the risks and what's at stake. Now, how about another rescue in India? The Indian Air Force on Monday rescued 4 fishermen who were stuck in a flooded river in northern India. And the only reason I want to show this to you is because the video is really spectacular. They used a rope ladder from an Air Force helicopter that carefully hovered above the river Tawi, where soldiers then pulled these stranded fishermen off of a concrete platform that was in the middle of the river after the river flooded. According to local media reports, the water level rose suddenly after heavy rain further north, and in the last 24 hours, the floods have killed more than 40 people in this area of the Punjab. And meanwhile, in the southern states of India, floods caused by the annual monsoon rains have killed over 200 people. It's one of those other things that you just don't hear about in the news because they're so busy reporting on pedophiles or politics or things that just make you want to go throw up. So this is stuff where people are actually hurting, and to me, it's very interesting. Let's go back to Afghanistan. I've been talking about that a lot, obviously, because I was just there. But, you know, they used to hold thousands of ancient treasures of antiquity. They had 2 of the most well-known treasures were called the Buddhas of Bamyan. There were 2 huge stone statues that were carved into a giant cliff face in the town by that name, Bamyan, the next big city that's west of Kabul.
An entire mountain range that was used by the Buddhists as a sacred place in centuries past. And that whole series of mountains there has Buddhist caves in it. Religious priests came here, carved the caves, and when the Muslims came along, many of the caves were destroyed. In fact, the caves were used as residences, and the tar from the fire covered many of the paintings inside, and that sort of saved those paintings. They've been able to remove the tar deposits from the fires of the last few centuries, and they have found Buddhist paintings, some of them of great beauty and color, inside the caves.
Now, back in 2001, the Taliban owned that area, and they just decided that these ancient treasures had to go. Even though they were built 1,500 years ago, they just had to destroy them. So they dynamited those statues to dust and destroyed an irreplaceable part of history. Now, I was there in 2008, and I got some footage of the holes where the statues used to be. And I remember when I saw it, being sickened by the senselessness of that, destroying something so old, so amazing, just out of sheer hate. You know, the Taliban never built anything. They only come to steal and kill and destroy, like the devil, who is their master. Well, they weren't content with that jackassery. They also showed up at the National Museum of Afghanistan and destroyed thousands of priceless figurines and statues with hammers. Good for you, guys. What a bunch of morons. Well, what they left behind is laid out on tables now at the National Museum of Afghanistan 18 years later. It's a bunch of shattered pieces of ancient Buddha figurines, just smashed because they were judged to be not Islamic. Museum workers in Kabul have been trying to fit them back together again as the rest of the country waits for the Taliban and the U.S. to reach a deal on ending America's longest war. Now, that agreement's expected to give the Taliban a seat at the table in deciding Afghanistan's future. So it's no wonder millions of Afghans are moving away, becoming somebody else's problem as they flee these barbaric, backward idiots. Few details have emerged from several rounds of the talks between the Taliban and the U.S. That have been held over the last year. And no one really knows what a Taliban return to Kabul might look like. I've been telling you about the near daily attacks by the Taliban, who now control about half of Afghanistan. Look, American warriors fought and died to end Taliban rule in 2001. And all this time, the Taliban have been saying, we'll be back, and we should have believed them. Actually, what they've been saying was, you have the watches, but we have the time, meaning they were content to just wait us out. And when the U.S. got too tired of spending $1 billion a week on a Chinese credit card in that dust bowl of a country, the Taliban would just step back in. And that's what they're planning on doing. So Shiraz Saifi remembers the day the Taliban arrived at the National Museum in 2001. For several days, the Taliban demanded access to the National Museum's rich trove of artifacts from Afghanistan's multi-thousand-year-old history as a crossroads of cultures. You're talking Greek and Persian and Chinese and Buddhist and everything else. Now, they set upon the offending items, anything that showed human forms, even early Islamic artifacts, with hammers, and broke them up as much as they could into dust against the floor. I mean, how sad is that? They shattered more than 2,500 statues, parts of them never recoverable. The restoration work could take 10 years or more. The Taliban smashed all these artifacts into thousands of pieces, many of them, like I say, not even recoverable, just the size of a penny. Now, some of the shattered heads are being held together with rubber bands in the workshop, which is kind of part of a horrific jigsaw puzzle that's going to take years of effort to even put these pieces back together, even some of them. Now, much of the museum's holdings, which amounted to thousands of pieces, were looted, and the building was even shelled, though some of the treasures were hidden away in the presidential palace and elsewhere. The roof of the room where these figurines are now being pieced together was even destroyed by gunfire and shelling. The museum's recovery started back in 2004, after the defeated Taliban just kind of was biding its time. A few hundred smashed objects have already been restored, and now the museum and the University of Chicago's Oriental Institute are compiling as complete an inventory as possible in hopes of tracking down any artifacts that happen to be missing, and then saving a digital record of the collection in case of a further threat. That database is more than 99% complete, they say, with more than 135,000 pieces that survived. Now, that's incredible. But for the missing artifacts, it really hopes to create a digital, kind of these wanted posters with these images that they can post online. So hopefully people can spot these objects wherever, on somebody's mantelpiece or whatever, and get them recovered. Experts and advocates of Afghanistan's history have expressed dismay that cultural preservation doesn't appear to be an issue in the U.S.-Taliban negotiations, and I think that's understandable. Those are more focused on U.S. troop withdrawal, and the Taliban guarantees not to allow the country to become a training ground for more global terror attacks. Now, the museum director, whose name is Mohammed Rahimi, is very concerned about the Taliban's potential return and is making plans to protect or even hide the museum's holdings.
I hope that they have learned that this is not against the Sharia of Islam. Nobody is worshipping these objects. Everybody is considered this object as an historical item showing our history. It's not the object of worship at the moment. We have achieved a lot during the 18 years. We have to consider it. If you see the museum in this situation, this is the result of this 18 years. It was not like this during the Taliban period. If we, if they are here in power and if there is no change in their mentality, then it means that we are definitely back in that before we started.
So he's actually urging the Taliban to go to museums in Doha, Qatar, where the group has a political office, the Taliban does, and go see the artifacts that are preserved and respected there. Not like that's going to make any difference. These guys do not operate by the same mentality that average civilized human beings do. These people are animals. They're barbarians. That's the best way to describe them. They're barbarians. They have no such thing as civility. All right, folks, that's all I've got for the Hot Zone today. Thanks for watching and being a part of it. I am kind of trying out something new here, using the green screen to replace my blown up television until I can get that fixed. Believe it or not, finding somebody who can fix a giant television in Panama is harder than you might think. So anyway, thanks for being a part of the Hot Zone. I hope you'll like and share it and be back again tomorrow. I'm Chuck Holt.
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media. Copyright 2019.